Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to Talk with Sharifa. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Please go ahead and check out my How I Became a Targeted Individual summary and or full story. And the links to those videos will be located in the description box as well as in the comment section. So guys, this is just part 2 to the last video I posted, ADHD and alcoholism. I just happened to come across 2 other videos pertaining to that subject matter that I wanted to include in the last video. But instead of adding it to the last video, I decided to just make a part 2. So in this clip, I'm going to share a recording from a doctor that's discussing ADHD, anxiety, and alcoholism and the correlation between the three. And then in the next clip that I'm connecting this clip to, you're going to see a video that I shared with another doctor, or I believe he's in medical school at the moment. And he goes even deeper into describing the connection between not Asperger's, ADHD, and alcoholism. I'm not sure if just now when I was talking I said Asperger's. So if I did, I apologize. But this video is about ADHD and alcoholism. And by the way, substance abuse, as I mentioned in the last video, is one of those overlapping symptoms between autism and ADHD. So it can be found in both disorders. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and hop right into sharing the video.
ADHD, anxiety, and addiction. How are they related, and what can... As a young female, gullible adolescent.
Sorry about that, guys. My phone is freezing up, but that video is actually a really good one too. I viewed it, but I don't think I ever shared it in any of my videos. But that video was about autism, Asperger's in particular, and masking and how women mask their symptoms. But that's not what this video is about. So I didn't mean to click on that. Let me go back to the video that I was sharing. Sorry guys, the phone seems to be glitching up now. I don't know what's going on. Give me 1 second. So the app seems to have stopped working. I'm going back in now.
ADHD, anxiety, and addiction. How are they related, and what can you do about all of them? I'm Dr. Trish Lee. Let's break it down together. First, we're going to talk about the ADHD brain pattern. What does it look like? What's happening in the brain? Then we're going to talk about the anxiety brain pattern. What's going on there? Then we're going to talk about how addiction serves those two brain patterns. So secondly, how do addictions serve the ADHD and anxiety brain pattern? Then third, we're going to talk about what you can do instead. Stay with me till the end of this video because I always give you a bonus brain tip, and today's is awesome. Okay, so let's get started. What does the ADHD brain pattern look like? It is a brain that's using excessive slow processing speed. So what that means is it's basically in fall asleep mode. That mode is called theta, and it goes at 5 hertz, 5 cycles per second, very slow, and it's making the brain feel groggy and tired. So the behaviors that it gives you is lack of focus, you become distracted, you are looking for stimulation if your brain is running this slow. So the ADHD brain pattern craves stimulation in the environment, either externally or internally, to keep it alert and engaged throughout the day. Now, down here on this side of the continuum is the anxiety brain pattern. It is cranking away, 25, 35 hertz. It's going very, very fast. It's overdrive mode. This brain pattern needs to be calmed down because it's cranking way too fast. Now, we know that ADHD and anxiety are comorbid, it's called. They exist together many times. And the reason that happens is because a person is born with an organic ADHD pattern. It's there since birth. It's called a neurodevelopmental disorder. Now, if it's there since birth, it means your brain's running too slow and it's falling asleep. It needs stimulation. So for many people, they either seek that stimulation out in the form of drugs, alcohol, behavioral addictions like gambling or video gaming or using their screens for other purposes. So what happens is they're getting that stimulation from the electronics or from their behaviors or substances. Now, at the same time, that brain might be seeking internal stimulation, which is anxiety or worry. So what happens, and the reason the patterns are comorbid, is because the brain's running slow and it automatically kicks it into overdrive gear, this extra fast mode, to offset the slowing. So now you have internal stimulation of anxiety that feels the need to be calmed. When the brain's running extra fast, it has to be calmed down and soothed. So many times people will look for drugs or alcohol or behavioral addictions to soothe their brain and their nervous system too. And for many people, they're doing both. And what the addiction does is it calms their nervous system, stimulates their nervous system simultaneously. And we know what happens in an addictive cycle is it's actually the craving or the planning of going to engage in the addictive behavior that starts to create this neurochemical rush in the brain that helps it feel stimulated and calmed simultaneously. And that's why addictions are so attractive to people with ADHD and anxiety, and usually they have both. Now, if you're following me, it's because an optimal brain pattern is operating here in the middle, 12 to 15 hertz for calm, relaxed focus. If your brain feels calm and relaxed and focused, it doesn't need to look for external sources of soothing and stimulation. So people who have an optimal brain pattern are far less likely to seek out addictive behaviors. Okay, so now what do you do about it? Well, science shows the best recovery programs for addiction also involve finding out if a person struggles with ADHD and taking care of the ADHD or the anxiety simultaneously to the addiction, because the ADHD brain pattern is the driving force for the addictive behavior, if you're following me. That's why neurofeedback brain training is now a pivotal aspect of inpatient recovery programs across the country, because we have to get to the root of the problem, which is the ADHD and anxiety brain pattern. So the way that it works is if you have neurofeedback brain training, you can teach the brain, basically, it doesn't put anything in, you teach the brain to make less and less and less of slow speed, less and less and less of fast speed, and more of perfect processing speed in the middle. As the brain is decreasing these speeds out here in the extremes and is bumping up that perfect processing speed, there's no longer a need for the addictive behaviors. And that's how you can have long-term success fighting addictions, getting right to the root and the cause of the problem in the first place. Okay, now, if you're finding value in these videos, please consider liking and subscribing, because it can only help us both. Now let's get to your bonus brain tip. Here it is. I want you to think about yourself. I want you to think if your brain needs stimulation or calming, or both. So think about that. Do you think your brain needs to be calmed down more? Does it need to be stimulated and excited more? Or do you have kind of that combo pattern? Now I want you to think about what you're currently doing to give your brain what it needs, because our behaviors all serve what our brain needs. So what are you doing to serve the need? Is it healthy or is it unhealthy? There's healthy ways to serve those needs in the brain. In the meantime, if you have a very big ADHD pattern in there, you likely want to have neurofeedback. But for all of us, all of our brains at some times seek stimulation or seek you to do for your brain tip is I want you to take an unhealthy behavior, like drinking every night, and substitute it with a healthy behavior of reading every night. Now, that switch is not going to happen overnight, but you can reboot your brain to no longer do your unhealthy habits. But you need to do habit replacement and put another habit in place that serves the same need of your brain. So you have to figure out, does my brain need to be stimulated? Does my brain need to be calmed? And that might vary across the day. So if you've watched some of my other videos, I'm always talking about my brain health program, where I try to, when I'm the best version of myself, which doesn't always happen, but when I'm the best version of myself, I follow a pretty, it's flexible but consistent routine where I work out in the middle of the day every day. I spend time cooking in my kitchen and playing vocal jazz radio or something, Italian cooking music, something like that that calms my nervous system while I'm making lots of healthy food. Then in the evening, I'll go for an evening walk around my beautiful neighborhood. Those are all things that stimulate and calm my nervous system throughout the day as it's necessary, with a really nice routine of having my nervous system on and then giving it breaks. So I challenge you to do that for yourself today. Okay, so I hope this helps you out, and remember, control your brain or it'll control you.
All right, guys, so that was good information, and she's a doctor, as you can see. And she also has ADD. So that was good advice from her and good information. In the next clip, you're going to hear even more information about the addiction ADD correlation. And you're even going to be shown a diagram. So that's why I really like that video. All right, so I will talk to you guys in the next one. Thank you for tuning in. Peace out.
So this paper came out about a month ago. So half of adults with ADHD have had a substance use disorder. Alcohol use disorder is the most common among adults aged 20 to 39 with ADHD, followed by cannabis use disorder and other drug disorders. More than 1/4 of those with ADHD had major depression. So what I want to share with y'all today is something that I think is really important, which is understanding why people with ADHD are actually prone to substance use disorders. So in order to kind of explore that with y'all today, here's what we're going to do. We're going to explain, first of all, what ADHD is a disease of. We're going to talk a little bit about, what is really wrong in ADHD, what is wrong in substance use disorders. We're going to sort of explore the overlap between those two things and kind of the neuroscientific vulnerabilities of both of these disorders. And once we understand the neuroscientific vulnerabilities and processes, we'll start to develop an understanding of how we can fix it, right? And so this is going to be really tricky because I'm going to try to send y'all some pretty complicated neuroscience that, first of all, I don't fully understand because it's so incredibly complicated. But secondly, it's going to be very simplified. And then
Okay, so I'm gonna fast
really
forward
ask y'all to sort of
through some of this, guys, because I don't want my video to be too long. It's already, the video that I'm attaching this clip to is already 50, I believe, 7 minutes long. So I'm not gonna share his whole video with you. I'm just gonna share parts that I felt had pertinent information pertaining to ADHD and alcohol abuse. So I'm gonna fast forward through this part, but I'm gonna put the link to his video in the description box because the whole video is worth watching if you have ADHD/ADD, or if you suspect that you have it. He's giving really good information in this video.
apply that understanding a little bit of results in poor selective. So we have a couple of different parts of our brain. So the first is going to be the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is responsible for inhibition. So there's also another part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, which is kind of back here. In the anterior cingulate cortex are results.
Oh, I just wanted to add something in real quickly. He's talking about also the fact that impulsivity is a symptom of ADHD. Remember, there's a differentiation between ADD and ADHD. So typically the impulsivity comes with the hyperactiveness. So that falls under the umbrella of ADHD. If you have the inattentive ADD form, like what I have, then that negates the impulsivity and the hyperactiveness. But everything else I relate to.
Results in poor selective attention and poor inhibitory control. So the frontal lobes are responsible for inhibition, but the anterior cingulate cortex is as well. And what we know in people with ADHD is that they've got basically a reduced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, okay? And the third thing that we're going to kind of talk about, and this is important for drug use, is impaired dopamine activity across the brain. So this may sound kind of weird, but you guys know that with ADHD, we actually give people stimulant medication, right? So this is going to sound kind of weird. But if you look at the brain of someone with ADHD, what essentially happens is that they're getting too many thoughts too fast. And if you look at that, what that really is, it's not that their brain is actually moving too quickly. It's that their brain is not able to turn down the volume of some thought.
Sorry about that, guys.
Turn down the volume of some thoughts. So when you give someone with ADHD stimulant medication, what you're actually stimulating is the PFC. So stimulant medication increases the activity of the PFC and allows you to actually focus on one thing. So it doesn't actually speed up the brain, it actually boosts your PFC function, which in turn will allow you to negatively inhibit other thoughts and impulses. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing to understand is that people with ADHD have impaired dopamine activity. And so part of the problem is that we know that in the PFC and the anterior cingulate cortex, and we'll get to the striatum in a second, we know that we have low dopamine or some kind of dopamine dysfunction in the brain of ADHD. And so if you kind of look at it, what drug use will actually do is increase your dopamine levels. So one of the reasons that people with ADHD will use substances is to almost self-medicate. So they have a baseline low dopamine activity, which results in ADHD symptoms. And when I add drugs, I'm going to boost... add drugs. When I add drugs, it's actually going to increase my dopamine activity, which will result in almost some amount of self-medication. The problem is that this effect is temporary. So over time, when I use drugs, at the very beginning, it'll stimulate parts like the PFC. But it'll also kind of have some effects on kind of the amygdala over here in the hippocampus. So you'll get stimulation here by drugs. Okay? But the problem is that over time, as you use drugs, they stop increasing dopamine over here. And let me know if this is too much, okay? And what actually happens is they start to affect this part of our brain called the striatum. So drug use, when I use drugs temporarily, it sort of has effects, let's say, over here and over here. But over time, it'll start to activate a different part of my brain called the striatum. And then what happens, once it starts acting in the striatum, what it actually does is decrease dopamine. So then when I increase my drug use, it actually has a paradoxical effect to decrease dopamine and then makes the ADHD worse. So this has to do with the way that our brain actually acclimatizes to drug use. So just to kind of recap, and apologies if I'm saying this over and over again. So in the beginning, we have dopamine deficiency here and not a good amount of activity in our PFC. If I use certain drugs, I can actually boost the dopamine over here, and it creates a self-medicating effect. This will sort of explain to you why people with ADHD may be vulnerable to substance use, because it's almost self-medicating in some way. Then what happens through chronic drug use is that the parts of my brain that get affected change. And once we get to the striatum, what we actually see is a decrease in dopamine activity, and then ADHD worsens. And there's some interesting evidence for this. So if you look at the D2 receptor, so I don't know if you guys kind of know this, but so if I have a molecule of dopamine, the number of receptors I have will kind of increase the signal. So if I have like 3 receptors in one molecule of dopamine, and this molecule of dopamine is kind of floating around, it has a very high chance of like increasing the dopamine signal. I can also increase the dopamine.
All right, I'm gonna fast forward the video, guys. He gave a good breakdown of what happens, and why somebody with ADHD would be inclined to use alcoholism. It's basically like you're getting that dopamine rush, and it seems to be helping to fill the void of the missing dopamine in the brain, but it's like a paradoxical effect, because then eventually there's like an adverse effect, and with extended drug use over time, your dopamine levels lower. So if you're already somebody that has ADHD and you already have a dysfunction of sorry, the noise campaign made me start to stutter. I'm sorry, guys. But you already have a lower dopamine level, then that's going to have catastrophic effects, and it makes your ADHD worse in the long run, which I believe is what happened to me.
The dopamine signal should be science, but let's talk about some of the mechanisms of ADHD and understand why people with ADHD are prone to substance use. So we reviewed a little bit of the neuroscience, but the first reason that people do it is to self-medicate, right? And this is essentially what I was explaining earlier, which is that people are dopamine deficient in ADHD. This may be part of the reason why they're sensitive to rewards. And so as we increase dopamine through substances, for some amount of time, it may actually improve the ADHD. And this is also why we'll use, stimulants, which can be substances of abuse, to treat ADHD. So it kind of makes sense, okay? So first reason is self-medication. The second reason is a little bit psychological. Okay, so this isn't something that we really understand the neuroscience very well, but this is something I've observed as a clinician. And we'll talk about this maybe in a future lecture. So ADHD is associated with a lot of shame. Okay, so this is what happens in people with ADHD. Like, you're smart, you know you're smart. You look around and there are other people that are able to do normal things. People that are stupider than you are, that are able to do normal things, and you can't do those things. Despite your IQ, you can't do those things. Despite all of your potential, you can't do those things. Despite being in gifted and talented classes when you were in the 3rd grade, you can't seem to focus your mind and pass a single exam in high school. So what happens in ADHD is people don't understand that they've got ADHD. So what happens is that they just feel like they're busted in some way, and they feel like they suck at life. They don't really understand, because the other problem that we see in ADHD is that oftentimes people have high IQs and they develop compensatory mechanisms. So what that means is that despite your ADHD, you basically use like some kind of weird IQ compensation to make it so that you can function semi-normally. That they just feel like they're busted in some way, and they feel like they suck at.
Yeah, I just was pausing. I didn't mean to cut him off what he's saying, but I was just wanting to say that I can relate to this so much, to that feeling of like, that feeling of not I said this in my story, as a matter of fact. I know I said this in my story, if you listen to my full story, where I was talking about the underdog syndrome, because you do start to feel like a failure, when it's like you feel like you can't get it together, and you're capable of doing certain things. You're like, I know I can do this. Why can't I do it? That kind of way. So him, like, I can't even explain how much I can relate to what this man is saying. It's like you're looking around and you're seeing other people doing this thing, and you're like, I know I can do this. What is stopping me from getting this done? And it's like an exerted effort. I really have to put effort in to getting stuff done. It's really hard. It's been that way my whole life. But then when I went to school for the second time and I was focused on something that I actually found interesting, that was when I excelled. But when it came to like the other things that I found boring, oh my gosh, it was so difficult. And it's like, I know I can do it when I really force myself, like with math, for example. When I sit there and I really force myself, I'm like, wait, I could actually be good at this. But it's just like, it's so freaking boring to me. It's like, and I just can't get it done. And I couldn't understand what was wrong with me. And now this makes what he's saying makes sense, you know?
They just feel like they're busted in some way, and they feel like they suck at life. They don't really understand, because the other problem that we see in ADHD is that oftentimes people have high IQs and they develop compensatory mechanisms. So what that means is that despite your ADHD, you basically use like some kind of weird IQ compensation to make it so that you can function semi-normally. But this IQ compensation, it's sort of like, I have a flat tire, but I'm so strong that I can just push the car, which like allows you to go 15 miles an hour when everyone else is going like super slow. So you're like exerting a ton of effort to ultimately get something that's kind of normal despite a very heavy handicap. And over time, these compensatory mechanisms no longer work. And so you used to be able to do what other people could do, and despite your high IQ, now you suddenly suck at life, which results in a bunch of shame. And the more shame you have, the more you need coping mechanisms. And then generally speaking, because your brain is, remember, sensitive to reward, because you've got an ADHD brain, the kinds of coping mechanisms you end up with are maladaptive ones. So it's hard for you to sit there and meditate.
So when he's talking about maladaptive, obviously he's talking about bad like coping mechanisms such as drug use. And it's so true though. Like oftentimes you can turn to substances to deal with, as he's saying, shame. I didn't know that it is shame. I mean, that makes sense what he's saying. I never looked at it like that, you know, until he said that. I was like, wait, maybe that's what it is for real. Like, but I remember back in my 20s, those 2 years where I was really an alcoholic, I do remember, you know, you can even listen to my story, me saying that the things that was happening around me and me not understanding why things weren't working out made me feel really bad. I was feeling dejected. Remember, I told you all I was depressed because I had failed that math class 3 times in a row, and I ended up losing my financial aid. Um, and I was doing well in my other classes, even though it was freaking hard. I'm pushing myself and being motivated because those were things that I found interesting. I did well in it, but it's like the math was always boring for me, and I just could not push myself to sit there and learn the material. It just would not. And now it's making sense. Dodo brain. It was the ADD. But that, and among other things that were going on in my life, you know, I was so freaking depressed back then that I found I used maladaptive behaviors to cope with what was happening. And it was like really catastrophic for me. And so when he's saying all the stuff that he's saying, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I can relate to everything this man is saying. I'm like, this makes so much sense. Like, this is so freaking me right now.
You to sit there and meditate if you've got ADHD. So instead, what you're going to turn to is drugs and video games and social media, right? Because you're so ashamed of yourself. So this is kind of the second place where drug use comes in, where generally speaking, what drugs do, I kind of think about them like clinically as an escape. And so ADHD gives people's minds things to escape from, right? Because in my mind, like, I'm an idiot. Like, I should be able to do it, but I can't do it. So I need to run away from that. So I get prone to drugs. And so then the third thing, which I'm sort of separating out, even though it's kind of, you know, maybe under self-medication, is that I do think that there's a neurovulnerability here, which is important. So like I've kind of outlined, there are a lot of things about the brains of people with ADHD that are a little bit different. Their sensitivity to reward, their inability to inhibit impulses. And so what this kind of results in is, you know, like a vulnerability to substance use. So a vulnerability to substance use disorders. So if we kind of look at like, you know, why these things correlate, there's definitely the self-medication kind of hypothesis. There's a psychological component. And basically like your brain has substance use, if we kind of think about it in video game terms, you know, like you've got fire resist and ice resist and lightning resist. And like substance use disorder or addiction resist for ADHD people is like minus 50%. So you're kind of born with this inherent trait of like having minus 50% addiction resist. And so this is why people with substance use disorders or people with ADHD, why like half of them have substance use disorders. So then the natural question is, okay, Dr. K, what do we do about it? Okay. So now I think I can just kind of say this to you all. So this is going to be tricky. So this is going to be one of the parts of when we talk on stream where I'm going to say particular things and they're going to be hard to implement, but I'm still going to go ahead and do this, okay? So a lot of times here on stream, what we try to do is give you guys easily accessible solutions that like you can do it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. This is one of the cases where actually what I really want to do is not give you all an easily accessible solution, but a plan of attack that unfortunately is quite difficult. The first thing that you've got to do is stop separating out substance use from ADHD. And this is really important. So a lot of people that I work with who have ADHD will say, oh, Dr. K, I have, I have trouble with motivation, right? Like I'm so ADHD, like I have trouble in school, I have trouble in motivation. How do I get motivated? How do I find out what I want to do in my life? And they mentally separate out the fact that they smoke pot every day from like these problems. So they're like, oh no, I'm lazy. It's not like the pot, like I'm lazy. It's not the alcohol. It's not the video games. They're not a causative factor. They aren't the reason I'm lazy. They are the result of my laziness, right? So it's kind of interesting, but if you have a motivational problem, if you have ADHD and you use any kind of substance, okay, marijuana, alcohol, stimulants, even video games, you have to understand that as long as you're using that substance, all of this cycle is going to be going on in your brain, and you're really not helping your brain to achieve motivation. So anytime you have a comorbid disorder, so this gets into the idea of dual diagnosis. So when you've got depression and alcohol addiction, you can't deal with either of them on their own. Because if you've got depression and you're depressed, it's going to make it far easier for you to reach for like booze. And if you drink all the time, your brain is going to be more prone to depression. So like you can't separate out these problems anymore. So like it's kind of harsh, but like I've heard so many people who will say, oh, my problem is motivation, laziness, or ADHD, or it's this, but it's certainly not the pot. Like, that's fine. Like, haven't you read all the research? Like, pot doesn't make you stupid, or pot doesn't cause this. It's fine. Like, it's being legalized. It's like safe. Like, I like it. I enjoy it. It's good. And I hate to break it to you, but if you're using any kind of substance and you have problems with ADHD, those two things are going to be, the substance is going to be contributing to the problem, like 100%. So first thing you've got to do is stop separating out the substance use from all of.
Okay, guys, so I'm gonna stop the video there, but you can hear like that's really good information, and I could relate to everything that he was saying. So I just wanted to add this in there. I'm actually now here thinking that I'm gonna make this just be a part 2, because I that video was already super long. That video that I wanted to add this video to. So I think what I'm gonna do is cut out the beginning. I don't even need to say this then because of what I'm planning to do. So you're listening to this now. Obviously, you all have heard whatever beginning it is that I decide to use for this video. But just know that I changed the beginning that was initially there. Because I was actually planning to add this into the last video. But now I think I'm going to just make it be a part 2. And I'm going to put the link to this video in the description box. But yeah, guys, there's really a correlation between alcoholism and ADHD. And it's literally scientifical as well. You know, it's almost like self-medicating when you use alcohol for ADHD, because you're replacing temporarily, that is, but you're replacing the lack of dopamine in your brain. But over time, it has catastrophic effects, because eventually what happens is with extensive drug use, alcohol or any other drug, you end up lowering the dopamine in your brain. I don't know if that's the case with marijuana. I don't think that's the case with marijuana, to be honest with you. I would have to look into that further. I mean, he was more so focusing on, he did kind of mention marijuana in this video, but he was more so focusing on alcohol. You know, and I did kind of learn that back in the day, to be honest with you. I was doing research on my brain, and, you know, that was when I was contemplating whether or not I had Asperger's, and I was talking to my mom about it. I did learn that alcohol lowers dopamine levels, you know, and so I didn't make the connection that, ADD That's an issue with dopamine. I didn't make that connection. I'm only now making it at the ripe age of 31, but I didn't make that connection. But I did come to the realization that the alcohol was making me feel depressed and that it was lowering my dopamine levels. But I didn't realize that I already had low dopamine levels to begin with. That's why I had the urge to drink. I didn't realize that. So now I do, I know that, and that really helps. Even though I'm sober now, I mean, I don't need it, you know? It's just good to know. I just understand myself better. But I was sober. I was sober when I graduated from college in 2020. I started drinking again in 2021 because of my targeting. And then I sobered up again. And so I've been sober now for a year and change. So I'm good. I don't have any urge to drink, but it's still just nice to have that understanding of why I had the drug abuse problem that I had and where it stemmed from, why I had that urge to drink, and why it had such catastrophic negative effects on my life, or a negative impact. Anyways, I'll talk to you on the next one. Peace out.